Welcome to Wire Guild. This tutorial quite simply is an arch. The tutorial will show you the arch framework plus a pendant to actually fit inside it, although what you put inside it is really entirely up to you. It's the arch that we're working on. I haven't put any amounts because it depends how big you're going to make this as to how much you'll need, but I've used 0.8mm 20 gauge round copper wire and 0.4 or 26 gauge fine silver and copper wire and a focal stone. You'll also need a coiling gizmo or a coiling jig. Now, I did some sketches and I was thinking of the idea of a wishbone or an arch, something that was sort of nice to put a chain through and have it sort of slashed over. It doesn't matter if you can or can't draw. I don't class myself as being able to draw. They're okay, but they're not particularly brilliant, but it doesn't matter. The reason I do draw is so that I can actually put the stones that I may or may not use on the top. I can work out where I want heavier pieces, like round this side, by sort of thickening a line up. And also, if you make them real size like these are, when you use your focal point, or like I'm going to do one of these coils to go up the side, you can actually lay it, let's just give it a bend, I can lay it on the drawing to give me a good idea if I've got the right sort of size. You don't want it too little, you don't want it too big. You want to be able to get it right in there for the stone that you're using. Obviously, if I was doing the yellow one that's under my left hand, I would need a different size coil. But I'm going to work on the labradorite, not the calcite. So, to make this coil, I've used silver and copper wire because I like the difference, I like the contrast between the two. Even when I've oxidized it, you still get a nice contrast between those. So that's what we're going to make first. Now, I had real fun and games with this because you can see mine clamps onto a table. However, try as I might, didn't matter which way around I put the camera, I could not get a decent shot of me making this coil if it was clamped to the table. So I might struggle just a little bit trying to get this done in the tiny amount of space I've got between my tabletop and my camera, but we'll have a go. I'm starting with some fine silver, that's 999 silver or Britannia silver or fine silver. I'm over the top and I'm going to wrap it around the little sticky up bit on the crank. I'm using the finer one because I like the effect it gives. If you use a heavier gauge you get a clunky type of coil. I want this to be quite a delicate one. Now let me just try and get this. I'm working straight from the reel. I haven't cut myself a length off, and I'm going to start and just wind this. I put the tail end in, I don't want that in. Let's get that out of the way. Come here, that's better. And I'm just going to wind this around. There's not a lot of resistance, so I can just use my fingertip actually and just sort of whiz. I've got my thumb against the wire that's about to be wrapped. That gives a certain amount of tension, but as you can see it's really easy to do, so I've just fast forward in this because I want quite a bit. Little bit of trial and error with lengths. What I tend to do is every time I do a certain length, say if I do a length of wire that's 3 inches, like this one's about 3 inches now when I measure it, it produces a coil that's probably, let's just have a look, maybe 1 1/2 inch long. So it's maybe a third your overall length that you end up with. And I tend to write these down in a little book so that I always know, 3 inch of coil measures about 1 1/4 inch coil. I'm going to use 5 inches to make the coil that I'm doing. Let me just check that length. No, I'm just over 4 there. I need to do a little bit more. There we go. I don't know whether you can see, but my silver wire has got little stripes on it. Don't worry about that. That is to do with the really high humidity we've got in Ireland at the moment. It is throwing it down all the time. and if I forget to put my fine silver in a bag, it tarnishes, and then when I use it like this I get pretty little stripes on the coils. But a quick scrub with soap and water and that's off, so don't worry. Right, 5 inches, there we go. So I'll slide that off and trim. Looks like a coral snake, doesn't it? It's quite pretty. Trim one of the ends off, there we go, and then unwrap the other end from the little sticky up bit. Now I do have a skill set video on how to make a coil, but we're going to go one step further than that, so I thought I'd show it all. To put the wire up the middle of this you need more than double. So my length of coil is 5 inches and I'm cutting 11 inches of the 0.8 or 20 gauge round copper wire, and I'm going to slide that in, but I'm not going to put the coil in the middle. I'm going to put the coil about an inch, is it? Yeah, about an inch, so 2.5 centimeters for those of you that do centimeters. I'm afraid my mind does not work on centimeters. And then I'll just wind tighter to the copper wire that's down the middle. This isn't to stop it moving around, it's to finish that end off so that it tucks in like a little funnel rather than it just sitting there like, you know, a step. Doesn't look good. So that's tightened and pressed down. Make sure it doesn't have a little sharp bit on it. And as you can see, it still will, hang on a minute, put everything down. I can still move the wire in and out if I want to, so don't worry. If yours doesn't move, fine. If it does move, fine. Doesn't matter. So back onto the coiling gizmo thingamabob, and I'm just going to wrap that little bit of wire that I've got around the crank bit and slide it back into the framework. In you go. Now this is going to be really hard to show you, I don't know. We're going to wrap it around a couple of times just to get started. Yeah. And then I'm going to hold on to the inner copper core. You can't really see my left hand at the same time. I'm going to wind around. If this was locked to the table this would be so much easier. But round we go. Once the silver's got to the point where it's up against the metal that we're wrapping around, we start, can you see it there? And it's just taking it in to wrap it around. I aren't holding the silver, I'm holding the copper with my left hand. If I hold the silver I will stretch it or pull it, and I don't want to. I want it to go on a kind of a natural tension, and if I get hold of the end I'll either be pushing it and feeding it in, or I'll be pulling against it and opening those coils up. So I'm only holding the copper and not the silver. I've got to the bit where now my silver has run out, so I've slipped it off. Don't worry, it won't unwrap. And then just wrap the silver tight to the copper. I always find it's easier to do this after I've actually bound it around rather than before, especially when I'm doing it with silver like this. I found sometimes if I do it with silver it almost sort of tucks in on itself and then you get a drag that you don't want. So I leave it to the end, fasten it round, make sure it's smoothed down, back into its holder, still holding onto the piece of copper, and it's getting a bit hard to hold because it's quite short, is that, but don't worry, I'll show you how to deal with that. If you slide it off and use your pliers, you can smooth the little end of copper onto the, I wish I knew the proper name for it, I'm going to call it a crank, onto the crank. That's what it is from now on, unless somebody tells me differently. So we've got copper both ends and silver coils going over the top. Now you could leave it like this if you wanted, and you could use it at this point. It's very pretty. However, I'm going to show you the next step. I've got another piece of copper wire and I'm wrapping it around the little sticky up bit. Now then, I'm going to hold the copper wire. I've got my little finger tucked in the coiling gizmo on the left, and I'm gently winding with my right hand. I aren't pulling the copper tight because I don't want to pull it between these two wires. I want it to lay on the top. I also want to make sure it goes in the right place, so there. Now I will show you what happens if you pull too tight. Let me just give this a tighter pull. There. You see how the wire has popped in between. Can you see it in there? It's popped in between. Now if it does that, you can just unravel nice and slowly, easing the copper wire back out, and then push them up a bit tighter so it's less likely to slip in, and then very gently, come on, in the right spot, wind over the top. Now this is one of those things, if you'll either get this or you won't. If you get it, brilliant, you're just using one piece of wire. If you don't get it, don't worry. Allow it to go between the wire, pull it tight, and then go back over again with a second row of copper. When you're 2 wires deep, it will give you the similar effect. It's just that if you can do it like this, it saves you on wire, especially if you come to make this in all silver. You don't really need that extra wire through, but it isn't going to harm the look of it. It's just that I've known when I've done classes, some people just pick this up immediately. Other people, it doesn't seem to matter how hard they try. The way they hold the wire, they just pull it that little bit tighter and it slips between. So I'm going to trim that end off and push that up because that's a bit too open. Ease over the end. If you can hear my cockerel going berserk, I am really sorry. I do apologise. I don't know what's wrong with him today. It must be because it's the new year. He must be feeling very happy, but he won't shut up. Right, I'm just tightening that down. Trim that and then press it in. And then other one and press that one in. Don't worry about these ends being too long. We can trim them off if we need to later, but let's just slide this out. There we go. We've now got a piece that measures just short, probably what, 1 3/4 inch, 1.5, 1 3/4 inch, but it will be the same as the other one because it started with the same amount of wire. It started with 5 inches of silver, so they're both the same size. Don't worry about these end bits. They can be trimmed or left, whichever you need. And I'm going to have these one either side of my pendant. I'm sorry I've done that out of shot, but anyway, you're going to get the idea in a minute because we're going to move on from that. I just wanted those finished. Now you can use these for all sorts of things. They make great bracelets, earrings, all sorts of stuff. So we're going to work on not that one because that one's much wider. We're going to work on this one with the piece of labradorite. So I need to make what's going to be our arch framework, and I'm using 3 wires to do this. My wires are probably about 12 inches long or 30 centimeters, and I'm just straightening the ends up because I don't want to be fighting with them all the time if they're all higgledy-piggledy. So I'm just making those straight, and then I'm going to start and I'm going to wrap around. So I've gone back to the 0.4 or 26 gauge. Now I have noticed on the forum everybody's really into the weaving and they quite like using a finer wire, so if you want to use a finer gauge, That's absolutely fine. If you're one of the people that like to use a thicker gauge, use that. So I've wrapped around 3 or 4 times, and then I've added my second wire, and I'm going over both of them. Then I'm going to come back through the middle of them, add the next wire, go over both, and then back just around the top one and back to the top. It's a little bit like a back stitch. Now if I turn, let's just move this wire out of the way, I'm working from the reel, the whole thing over. So my wire is now at the bottom. I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm just using these wires, so I'm going over 2, and then I'm going round that middle one and back to the front, over 2, around the top one and back to the front, wire up to the top. So let's see if I can make it easier. I've got 3 wires. I've wrapped around the bottom wire to anchor my finer wire in place, and then I've wrapped up and over 2 wires. It comes round the wire that I just went round, or the middle one, and then it goes over 2 wires to the top, and it comes around the top one, and then the wires pointing upwards. We then flip the piece over, but if we were looking at it from the front, you would just see single wires coming down that side. So if the wires are 1, 2, 3, we come up below 1 and go in between 2 and 3, come up between 1 and 2 and go down at the top of 3, and then wrap around 3. And you do the same thing repeatedly. So I'll show you again. So turn over, wrap over wires 1 and 2, come up between 1 and 2, go over wires 2 and 3, come up between 2 and 3, wire to the top, flip it over, wrap around the wires, going in between the wires 2 and 3 and coming up between wires 1 and 2, and then over the 2 wires to the top and around the top wire. Turn the whole thing over and do exactly the same thing again. I'm going over 2, around the middle one, over 2, around the top one. Turn it over 2, around the middle one, over 2, around the top one. And you're going to keep doing that exact same stitch for quite some time. You can press it with the pliers. Now I've done that, and I've got about, I want about 5 inch. It's a little bit tight, is that? So I'm just going to ease it out. Just give it a wriggle. There we go. What have I got? 5 inches. Lovely. That's what I wanted. So just even it up. Often if you just run your fingers backwards and forwards, they will sort of even underneath your fingers. I'm just making sure that I haven't tightened that too much. And at the centre point at 2.5 inch, I'm going to get my round nose pliers when I find them, and I'm going to grip. Where'd they gone? There they are. And I'm going to grip in the middle, and then I'm going to bend the wires so that they come down and cross like that. That's going to make our bail. Whoop. Sorry, I'm going to cut this wire off because it's fastening me to things. Okay, separate the wires slightly by putting your finger on the top so that doesn't bend. Now where's my picture gone? Come here. Right, so I need, looking at the drawing and how far I need this to come in, I start bending this with my fingers, bringing the sides in to produce a wishbone shape or an arch. Little bit at a time. You're far better moving the wire a little bit, putting it down, having a look at it, picking it up, easing it out, easing it in, than to try and do one big bend and then finding that, you know what, I didn't want that. I've taken the wire from the inside. Let's just fasten that off. So I'll just trim it down. That's where we started the wire initially, and I'd wrap round 3 or 4 times. Just going to smooth that down to get it out of the way, because otherwise I'm going to be messing about with it all the time. So I've taken that inner wire and I've taken it inwards, and I've taken the inner wire from the other side and bring that together. Now I need these edges fatter, so back to holding the bail to stabilise it, take them out, bring it in, there's a lot of fiddling to get your arch the shape you want it. So I've got my stone now, and my stone needs to be large enough that my stone will go in the middle of this arch shape, which it is, I think. I'm trying to get it back on the drawing. I'm a little bit tight, but I'm near enough. The drawing is not there as an exact thing. I aren't putting my wire on it and making it into the exact shape of the drawing. What I'm doing is I'm just using it as a guide, really. It just gives me a rough idea where I want to be going. Maybe if I could draw better, I'd use it more. It's a little bit too tight, but if I open it up slightly, these 2 wires that are going acrosswards are going to form the bottom of our arch, and it's going to form the stability that we need. And then the coils that we're putting on the outside, well, they're going to be decoration and strength and thickness. Come here. Might better if I held it that way around. They're a bit springy, these coils, and sometimes they don't want to do what you want them to do. There we go. That's the idea. This end is a little bit long, so pliers straight over the top and just cut that off so that it's much shorter. Now then, let's have a look. Yeah, that's about the right size for that stone. Obviously, if we're using the yellow stone, we'd need it much wider. So I'm going to take the wire now down to the other side, not losing the amount of size that we want, and I'm just going to wrap it around the 2 remaining wires. Make sure it's still the right size. Yes. If it needed to be bigger, obviously I could undo that and move that wire out of the way, wrap that one around that side. Okie dokie. You don't want these too tight, because I'm going to show you these edge wires now. I am going to wrap backwards to allow for the depth of this coil. There we go. If I bent these to the side, they would just look really odd. So seeing that that's going to go around the sides, like a little bit like a caterpillar, isn't it? I'm going to take my round nose pliers when I find them. That's it. It's across the face, and I'm bending this upward like that to produce a loop there. Can you see that? I'm going to move that wire out there. You've got this loop, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. There we go. Let's just get these other wires on the outside edge. It's just getting them out of the way. Now I'm going to thread my coiled wire down and over the top of the inner. Am I on the inner one or the outer one? I think I'm on. Come out of the way, you. There we go. I'm on the outer one. I don't know why I thought I was on the inner one. And pass the end of the wire through so that this can lay up the side of the arch that we've already made. Now it's not sitting quite right because that end's a little long, so I'm just going to smooth that wire out, slide it back off, and I'm going to trim that end down. There we go, so it's shorter. That's better. Slide that through the what's going to be the bail, and then using the wire that we thread through the middle, once you've got it into the right place, you can just pull that tight against that weaving that we've already done. And there we go. And the same with the other side. So coil, yeah, let's just trim that one down first rather than pulling it off afterwards. I need to do the other end as well? Yeah, might as well. Slide that onto the outside wire. If you can get it to go in the hole. Right, okay, and then ease it so that it's the same shape, echoing the shape that you've already woven. And I'm going to wrap that around the woven framework that we've already got. So just hold it still. In you go. Nice and tight, and pull that round. This then is an arch, and really that is the basis for the piece that we're going to be making later on, but it can also be the basis of so many other things. Now let's just, I've got a little sharp bit, probably when I trimmed the end of that that coil, and I didn't trim it quite neat, so I've just trimmed a little more off, and I'm just going to press that down with some snipe nose pliers just to make sure that it doesn't catch. I could use a file or something like that, but yeah, a little bit rough, but it'll be okay. There we go. Make sure my stone still fits, which it does. Now, this might be a good time for you to take a break. It's quite a long tutorial is this, so you could have a rest. And we're back again. Okay, so I've taken the wire that was coming that didn't have the coil on, and I've just made a little curl, bringing it back to the edge of the piece, and I'm going to run that wire up in the gap in between the coil that we made and the weaving that we've done, like that. And I'm going to do the same with the other one. So this is the free wire out of the three. One went across and made the bottom, one we put the coil on, and the other one I've made a circle just to disguise the end, and then I am easing that in and around the edge in between the weaving and the coil, and I'm just going to wrap it around that framework. There we go. Now these can be pushed and shaped and twisted with your fingers. You can either have that as the front and use it as fancy, or it can be back and that can be an anchor point for other things to come through. Let's have a look at my other wires now. So I have these two longer wires. I'm probably going to end up cutting these off at some point, but let's just have a look. Now, if that was the front, the stone would sit there, and these then would come down to create some sort of platform for it to sit on. However, I aren't sure that I like that. So when I started, I really liked the idea, and when I did the drawing, I really liked the idea of this stone going downwards. I'm just going to sort of tack it in. This isn't holding it in properly by any means. This is me just popping a couple of wires around the stone so that I can see it without my fingers being in the way. It doesn't matter how many times you make a piece of jewellery, how many times you do a similar thing. They all work out so differently that you will find yourself looking at things thinking, well, should it be this way? Should it be that way? Should it be a different way? So I've popped the stones in so that I can have a look. And I aren't really happy with it. I don't like that stone sort of dangling down from the arch. It's not really, doesn't really look right. So I've trimmed those wires off because they got a bit mangled when I wrapped them around the stone, and I'm just going to take them up now and wrap them around the wires that are forming that bottom support, and then I'll trim them off and press them down, because I've decided that I don't like the stone downwards, so we'll get rid of those. If I'm not having the stone now downwards, I don't need any wires down there to actually support it. So let's bring the other one round and fasten that one off. Wrap that around a couple of times. If you were wanting to do something like this and use a large bead, we wouldn't have tied these wires off, and what we'd have done is actually thread these wires through a bead, which would have been a lot easier. But you don't want me to show you easy, do you? No, you can do that on your own. So let's just tighten these down and have a look. Always reminds me of a little door, and in the past I have not done anything inside of these. I've just actually done the arch on its own as like a little door and left it. I've just finished the edges on, put some beads on, put some swirls and curls around it, and left it at that, and that looks really lovely as well. But that's fine, and you could do that, but for me to show you, I might as well show you everything. So let's just trim off some of these ends, because I keep poking myself with them. And I'm just going to take that now, and I'm tucking them inside that weaving that I did. I'm pressing them down with my pliers. You just bear with me a moment, I'm just going to have a drink. Sorry about that, my throat was starting to go. So, other wire, come round. Any way you can find where you can tuck these wires in is absolutely fine. It doesn't matter that you're going across something that you've woven. As long as these are firm, you haven't got any sharp edges, once the piece is finished, it will look like they've always been there. Let's just tuck that one in. And bring this one. Do I need that? No, I don't need that. Let's just trim it off. There we go. I'll just take the pliers and tuck that one in and squeeze it down. Little tiny bit there. Let's get you out of the way. We don't want you stabbing me, or anybody else for that matter. So let's just close that in. Okay. Right, so my ends are tucked in, my wires are laid down the edge. Move my bits and pieces out of the way, make sure it hangs. It does. Always a good idea to stick a piece of wire through the bail and just check. So let's go with this stone again. Now, do I prefer it the other way up? Yes, I do prefer it the other way up. However, that which I was thinking of as the front is not going to work, because that wire is so far forward that my stone is going to be really proud. Now, if I flip the whole thing over and it goes in the back, it sort of sits in, and that's sort of nicer. So yeah, that was the front, but it doesn't really make any difference. I'll flip it over and I will use this side. Oh yeah, I quite like it inside. That's kind of nice. So that was going to be the original idea. That was what the drawing was. However, these things always change and alter. So I've got 4 wires now. These are going to create the mount for the pendant. The pendant that's going to be wired into our arch. Now, if you want to make this just as a pendant, you can do it exactly the same way. So I'm just getting some more fine wire. Now, remember the weave that we did to create the arch, where we went sort of over 2, round 1, over 2, round 1. Exactly the same thing again, except this time I've got 4 wires. But it works the same way. So let me just, whoops, let's just drop them all over the table. So we're going to wrap around, oh, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times, just to make sure that the wire's nice and firm and anchored and in one place. And then I'm going to bring in my second wire. So it's the same weave as this one. So I'm going over 2. So then I'm going to go around the top one, bring in my third wire, and then over 2 and around that top one. Come here. It's the top wire where I want to go around. I managed to get it in the wrong place. And then I've got a this is what you get for not straightening your wires at the end, you see. It's not behaving. So I'm going to add the 4th wire now. So I'm going over 2 and then wrapping around that one. Okay, turn the whole lot over, and yeah, I really need to tuck these in and straighten them off a bit. They always say that preparation is the biggest part of the job, don't they? Well, when you're being silly and you've got a camera there and you don't prepare properly, you get your wires twiddled. Let's just come here. Oh, they're all over the place. It's like spiders' legs are us. Right, go there. Okay. Are you straight now? Ish. Over 2. Round the second one that I've just gone over, and the same again, over 2, and then over 2 and round the top one. Turn the whole thing over and start again. Exactly the same. So it's a little bit like a back stitch, in that you going on one side of the sewing, you've got the double length stitches, and on the other side of the sewing you've got single length stitches. But because we're turning over each and every time, you're getting that mixture between, and when you press them together you get this lovely stitch or weave that's almost like knitting. I don't know if you've seen it. There is a picture on my Facebook page of a large bracelet I did, and that had I think I used 12 strands for the actual bracelet band, and that was done in exactly the same way as this, and it was all just the over 2, round 1, over 2, back round 1, and it looks amazing. I actually almost didn't bother putting a stone on it because it was so stunning just as its own with this weave. It's incredible. You see, now I'm having to straighten my ends out. Let's flip it over, two, around that top one that I just went over, two, and around that one, two, around the top one, and move it up. I'm not going to do so much of this. This is just to hold all 4 wires together. Now I'm being very naughty. I'm coming down backwards without flicking over. Please ignore what I'm doing. It's because I totally forgot while I was working. You can come back down once you've got used to the pattern, and if you do, you have to flip it mentally in your mind what you're doing. It's probably easier when you're starting with this weave if you flip the wires over every time, because then you know exactly what you're doing, because you're doing the same thing every time. It's not like having to remember 2 different stitches. I suppose it's a bit like doing a knit row and a purl row. It's just that if you could turn the knitting all the way over, you could just do a knit row every time. It's just because you purl back that you get that different stitch. Let's press these up with the pliers and let's see how much I've got there. That's probably about enough. We want it just to sort of sit in the middle of the stone. You don't want it to go too far. If it goes too far, well, it's not necessary. Now this wire's at the bottom and I want that one in the same place. So I'm going to go over 2 and around the second one, and then over 2 and around the third one, and then over 2 and then around the 4th one, which is the one at the top, which will bring my wire so that the start wire and the finish wire now are in the same direction on the same side of the piece. So I need to move that now into the middle of the wires. These wires are probably about 10 inches long. Depends on the size of the stone. Bring these up. I always give myself a bit more for this because I don't know, I might want to use the ends to do ornate bits on and around the arch. Lovely. So that's about in the middle now. Trim that end off. Lovely. Put my stone on. Now don't worry that these 4 wires once bound are much thicker than my stone. I'm taking the wires that are on the edge where the fine wires are finished, and then I'm just going to wrap around 2 or 3 times with the finish edge wire, and wrap around another probably a couple of times on the one that I started on. It's just to finish these wires off, but they're going to be at the back, so don't worry that it'll have a different texture to the rest of the wire, because it won't really matter. Come on, round you go again. Once that got round a few times, I will use my snips and trim it off, and then make sure that it's nice and smooth and press down. Let's have a look at the other end. The other end was already wrapped around a few times because that was where I started, so I just need a couple more. And then I can trim off, press it down, there we go. So I'm bringing those and I'm crossing the wires over, not too tight, but just so you've got like a little loop. Now that will sit against the back of our stone, and then press the other forward so that the stone sort of, as if it was a little shelf, and the stone then sits on it. If it's easier for at this point, you can use a little bit of masking tape and actually tape that on the back. So I'm using the top wire and I'm going up, bringing it over and taking it to the other side in a nice curve. Then I'm going to take the top wire from the right hand side and take that back in a curve across the stone. Hold your fingers over the top, take the next wire down from the left and over the top to the other side of the stone, and then take that one from the right up and over the top to that side of the stone. Now wriggle them about so that they're nice and even, and then push down against your work surface or your pad of paper, whatever you're working, so that they sort of curve around your stone. Now the wire that you've got sticking out is going to go up the edge of your stone. That will stop your stone moving left or right. That goes up, and you want to bring those wires together nice and tight at the top of the stone. Okay, might take some fiddling with. Now then, I'm going to move the back wires. Let me just show you, flip the whole thing over without either stabbing my own eye or beating the camera up. I'm going to move these back wires further down so that they're out of the way, and taking the wires that are the top most wires, sorry, let me try and get this so you can see it better. I'm going to take these wires at the top, there we go, and I'm going to wrap it all the way around the back of the stone, and then coming up so that the wire on the right sits against the wire on the left that's going up, and the wire on the left is going to sit against the wire on the right. Now let me show you that from the back. Let me just straighten those up with my pliers, it's sometimes easier. There we go. So you can see that one wraps over one way and one wraps over the other. Then I'm going to go back to my finer wire to wrap these wires at the top and create a bail. There we go. It doesn't need to be a proper bail because I'm going to add it into the arch. However, if I put it on it anyway, you will be able to see how you would do this if you were just using this as a pendant and not including the arch. Sort of a 2-for-1 deal really. So let's just get the finer wire. I'm going to make this quite simple. I'm going to wrap around 2 wires, all the way around 2 wires, and then do a figure of 8 to the other side. My hand's in the way, sorry. Let's just hold that and wrap it around. I'll probably wrap around 2 or 3 times just to get this anchored. So once you've got it nice and firm, that's it, all the way around. You can just press that down with your pliers. That will just give it a little bit more strength. It'll also straighten those wires up for you. And now I'm going to do a figure of 8 across to the other side. Now you see, just straighten them, and then I go around both wires all the way around, and then in a figure of 8 I will come back to the other side, but I'm just going to flatten that down with the pliers. I've got a nice V shape sort of going on there. Let me just even those up. I like the way you can see the wire so much better if you've got a nice wide V, but if that's not your preference, you know, if you want to do parallel lines, you can do. If we were making this into a pendant, this would be the bails, so you would be looking at making these the correct length for your bails. If you are going to anchor this into that archway, which is what I'm going to do, we're only looking this really as a decoration type piece. It's holding the wires together at the top, which is stopping the stone coming out. But other than probably the first 4 or 5 weaves, the rest is just decoration. Now I could take this much wider and bend the wires out. I may bend them out a little bit more in a minute, but I'm just going to keep going with the figure of 8. Now, just as a quick aside, using 2 wires like this and doing a figure of 8 weave between makes a really beautiful ring shank. So if you do these parallel, sort of 4 wires all together, 2 sets of 2, and weave in between, looks really lovely as a ring. So let's have a look. I'm just going to widen these slightly. It stops the weaving that I've already done come up. I like this bit here, but I think I'm going to weave a bit further. I don't need to bend it over because it's not a bail, so I don't need to go too far. I just want to balance it a bit with the crisscrosses that I've done over the stone. It's sort of a very Celtic feel. But the archway reminds me very much of the idea of like fairy doors and things like that, so this Celtic feel seems to go with it very well. But remember, you're not tied to this. This is really 2 tutorials. You've already done your arch, and we're now doing a pendant that we just happen we're going to put in. If I was doing this at a pendant, I would start and fasten those 2 wires that are sticking out the side in. Might be an idea to take a break, have another, rest your fingers, rest your mind. Now then, let's see what this looks like. Okay, so that goes there, further down. My stone's sort of hanging over at the bottom, which is okay. But I don't know, I think I might like it a little higher. So I'm just going to, let's just trim this end off. Otherwise I'm going to end up pulling the whole reel of wire off and it'll end up on the floor. Right, I'll just go around a few more times because I like it. Press it down with pliers. Make sure it's neat. Like I say, if this was going to be a pendant, these 2 wires that are sticking out at the side, I would probably just twist them together and bring them up and then fasten them into that gap that you can see at the top, just where I'm fastening that fine wire through now. Probably take it in there, and you could use it as a very, very pretty pendant. Or if you wanted, you could take all 4 up to the top and weave them into the bail. Let me just get that around there. And that's the joy of wire, that there really is no right and wrong. There's nothing definite to say, well, you can't do that with these. You could take those 2 wires at the side and make curls with them, or you could add beads to them. Any number of things you could do, and everything would be okay because your stone's secure. Let's just trim that down. That's nice. And flatten that little sticky bit because we don't want to stab anybody. There we go. Make sure it's nice and straight. Push it down so it's tight. Now then, let's have a look at these edge wires. These edge wires, when I'm anchoring to something else, are purely going to be used to fasten the whole piece to the arch. Now then, let's see again. Yeah, it fits on quite nicely. I'm a little bit high out of shot, but I want to show you these bottom wires. That's why I've got it up there. Get my hand out of the way. So the wires that are coming from the back, I have bent upwards, straight up to the front, and the wires that are on the front, I am bending straight back. I'm going to feed them between the triple wire that we wove and the coils that we created, and slowly slip the whole piece in so those wires come through. Okay. Now a little bit of wriggling to make sure I've got it in the right place. Yeah, it's near enough. So you can see at the top I've got a little bit room at the top so that the bail still shows, and at the bottom it's just sitting on that wire. So let's take these wires now, and all I'm really doing is I've just bent it around the curve of the arch, the woven arch, and I'm just pressing it so that it holds still. I aren't going to fasten anything down with a pair of pliers until I'm sure that everything's in the right place. Now these are the wires that came through from the back, and I've just smoothed those out. I'm about in the right spot, so I'm going to take these wires. Do you remember that extra wire that we slid there, that was down between the weaving and the coil wire? I'm using that as my anchor point, and I'm going to take the wire through it and then tighten it. It doesn't want to slide against the coil. There we go. Nearly knocked the camera over, Rachel, well done. And just tighten that against. That will hold the whole thing secure, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. There we go, we're still in place. Pull that tight, and then underneath that spare wire, and then I'll slip that through. It catches a little bit on the coil because the coil having the little lumps and bumps on it, don't want to slide quite as easy. So that's through and against that, so that should be fairly secure at both sides. Now then, so I've got the wires now from the back. I'm just going to move those up out of the way at the moment. Let's have a look. What can we do with you? If I thread those the same way that we did, you know, just as a line going up the side of the arch, just highlights the difference between the triple strand weave that we did and the coil. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I am underneath the wires that are coming from the pendant, and I'm just laying down the edge, and then I'm just going to wrap around the top of the coil. There's my pliers. Pull that tight. Got my thumb on the top so that I don't pull the curve out of it. Don't want to pull it too tight so that the curve comes out. And I'll do the same on the other side. Now if you wanted to continue to build this, you could keep adding different pieces. You could add extra strands of wire, you could add these beautiful fancy wires that you can buy that look like they've got little bobbles on them, or that look like the pre-twisted, or you could add square wires that have been twisted, and you can keep filling up within the shape that we've got and skirting the outside of the shape. Now then, what we got on the top here? I'd spend an awful lot of time sort of looking at the piece and deciding where I want things to go, and just stroking wires. I'm sorry, I keep taking the piece up out of shot. Let's just get that back for you. Okay, I want these pieces to come down, and I'm going to swathe them over the arch, but not as a cross. It makes it too fussy. Just there, as you can see, that top bit's just too much. Let's move that piece out of the way. So no, we're not going to do that. Take that one back. Take that one back. If you come across a piece and then go back, you'll get this nice soft curve. So my two wires are going to go over the edge of the coil and the same on the other side, as if this was a sweeping curtain that somebody's just parted to see what's inside. Yeah, that looks nice. So I'll wrap that down through over the coil and back round to the front. One wire at a time if that's easier. One through and then the other. Now this is what I mean about length of wires. When we first started, I used, like I said, about 10 inch, but if you wanted to use more, sort of, I don't know, extra 4 inch, say 14, 15 inches, you would have a lot more wire now on these bits to start and add more twists, more curls, and it would give you more scope. I've only got so much here, so there's not loads I can do with them. So I've come all the way around and I'm going to go over again. I'm trying to move them just out of the way that little bit. Let's do the other side. If you notice I don't finish off straight away, I'll take the wires through and bring them to the top and wrap them around and then leave them and do so the other side. And then I may do a few other steps before I go back to finishing off. It's not a fear, but it's like the idea that I may want to do something else with those wires, or I may want to move them, or I may want to alter them in some way. And the minute I fasten them off, you really can't. You've got to that stage then. Now these are the wires that we tied around the single wire at the back, you know, the ones that came from the front of the pendant, and I am just using a pair of nylon jawed or plastic nosed, whatever you call them, pliers, and I'm just straightening that out a little bit. Now I could crisscross that and it would give extra support to the back of the stone, but to tell you the truth, that stone's absolutely solid in there. It really, really doesn't need it. So I'm just going to take it down to the bottom and then just take it to the front. So I just found a little sort of a niche, little gap, and I'm just going to take it through to the front of the piece and then wrap it around the bottom of the arch, and I'll do the same with the other side. Let's hit that one. Pop it through. Now I could finish these off here, just fasten them around and leave that sort of straight flat bit at the bottom of the stone. It just looks a bit bare to me, and you know me, I can't bear not to have a fancy bit if I've got a space. Let's just tighten those up. Right, they're not going anywhere now. I'm going to bring them together and then I'm going to put some curls in. That will just hide the straightness, if you like, of that bottom line, which is really just a bit boring for me. There. A few little curls in. All this pushing I'm doing is just making sure that everything is where it ought to be. Now this is a fine piece of wire that was left near the top. I can't even remember what it came from, but I'm just going to, oh I know, it was from the weaving at the top of the pendant. I've just wrapped that through once. So back to my curls, and let's do some more, because I like curls. Also, it's a little bit symmetrical for me, is this pendant. So putting some asymmetric curves on the bottom always makes me feel better. So that's one wire through and 2 wires through. That's just back through that wire at the bottom of the arch. And I'm going to put another curl in it. Can't go all the way across because I'll hide those other curls which I quite like. So I'll just put one there. Yeah. Kind of nice. Okay. I've got 2 wires at the top, which were the 2 wires that we laid into just opening up the bail a little bit. Right, so that's the fine wire. Let's finish off these edge bits. So I've tightened them up and I've tucked them up nearer. Now, where can I finish them off? A lot of the time you're just looking for somewhere where you can actually pop it. There's the straight wire, again, you know, the wire that went between the coil and the weaving. It's come in quite handy actually, because it's provided an anchor point for me to tie an awful lot of the wires off to. So that was fortuitous. Let's pull that round. And that one as well. Tighten them with the pliers. Make sure they're neat and together. This is my mother's fault. She used to do a lot of embroidery when she was younger, and therefore taught me that the back of your work was meant to look just as good as the front of your work. I never quite got that with embroidery. I used to have coloured strands everywhere. Right. Make sure that isn't sharp. It isn't. Now then, let's do the same with the other 2 wires from the other side. Making sure they balance. I think it's to do with living with things. I think that's why I don't put the wires in one place and then tie them up immediately. It's almost I have to leave them there for a couple of moves, and then I can go back and relook at them again to make sure that I do actually like that there. And that's possibly why I don't finish off immediately, especially when I'm doing something like this, which is so free form. There won't be another one that's just like it. I mean, the archway itself may be, you know, similar, but when it comes to adding the central bits, that's when you really start and use your own imagination and your own flair. Tighten that in. Then we're just going to get this other piece back through that same wire, that smooth wire that's between the weave and the coil, and just pull that tight. And then I'll trim that off and tuck it down like I did the other one. Now, I'm really sorry, but the camera battery died and I didn't notice until after I took those ends in, which was really bad of me. So those ends were all tucked in. I had a couple of ends at the top which I just fastened around there, and all I've got left now are these 2 and this fine one that I need to tuck in. But I didn't do anything else major. All I did was fasten some more ends in. The end from the coils that I did at the bottom were tucked in and finished off, and that really was all I did. The 2 at the top were the ones that we ran up the side of the weave. Now all I'm doing now with my pliers is I am slightly altering the angle of the 3 wires that are woven so that you can see them a little better, and a lot of pushing and shoving with my fingers, making sure that everything's flat and neat and that everything's staying put. Now I want to put some beads on, so I've got some silver wire and some silver beads, and then I'm just going to get this anchored and wrap it around 2 or 3 times to make sure that it's not going to come out. Well, I will do when I find my pliers. There we go. And to the curls at the bottom, I'm going to add beads. Now normally I have little labradorite chip-ins, which normally I would have used, and it would have looked almost like grass or moss underneath at the bottom of the archway. But unfortunately I'm totally and utterly out until I get another order through, so I'm going to use little silver beads. They'll look quite pretty, and they will tie in with the silver that are in the coils, so I'll bring a bit more balance with tying the colours in. So I've trimmed the end of that off and put that in my scrap pot, and then smooth that over. It's always handy, you know, to have a scrap pot actually on the table, even if it's a jam jar or something like that, because then you can put the appropriate metal straight in rather than having to sit there when you finish working and go through, you know, working out which bit goes in where, or trying to remember, you know, was this silver, was this plate, because you actually know because you're using it. So these are just teeny weeny 2mm beads. Pop those down, and all I am doing is adding these in various places: centre of the curls, in between 2 lines. You could add as many as you wanted, as few as you wanted. I'll just add a smattering. I'm not going to go mad with them. I just like the odd one here and there. Oh, pearls would probably look really nice as well if I had any little tiny like seed pearls. They would look really good in here. But I'm just going to keep going, and I'm going to keep adding beads. But there's no point in you watching me, so I've speeded it up a bit so that you don't have to get totally bored of me threading beads everywhere. You could take these beads and go all the way up the side, you know, so it looked almost like a rush of a flow of water or something like that. But again, there's no mistakes, there's only new designs, and the only thing that may help if I could think of the right word, wouldn't it? The only thing that limits you is your imagination to what to do. And don't be worried about really stretching that and trying, because there's times when we get halfway through things and think, I really aren't sure about this, and I'm not sure. If you actually go through it and finish it, even if you're not totally sure, then give it a polish or oxidize it, and I think you'll be quite surprised. Sometimes you just have to trust, you know, those instincts inside. So I've got various bits and pieces of beads on. I've probably got, because they're so tiny, I'm not sure exactly how many I've got here, maybe a dozen little tiny silver beads. So I'm just going to finish this wire off. So I'll wrap it around basically anything I can find 2 or 3 times, and then I will snip it off with my lovely new snips, because I bought some new snips which are rather nice. Let's just get that, yeah. See, still fiddling, still pushing and pulling. Now then, I have these 2 wires here, and I could do other things with them, especially with the joys of the nylon jawed pliers. If you don't have any of these, they are really kind of cool. They do wonders straightening your wire out, and especially with copper, because copper's is a lot more forgiving than silver. Silver would have work hardened by this time to the point where you couldn't do anything. So do I want another curl? Let's have a look. So following the sweep that I made before, do I want another one? And you know, I don't think I do. I think it's too fussy. I don't like it covering the weaving either. So we'll get rid of that, move it to the back. Where else could I put it? I could run down the outer edge of the coil and I could crisscross over the top. However, let's have another look. I don't think it's going to be very secure without me putting extra bindings on in the middle. It could lift, but I don't think it needs it. So what I'll do is I will just tie this around this top edge. Where are we going to go with that? In you go, through there. Sometimes it's finding a hole that you can actually get it through. Then using some pliers, I'll pull that through tight. And that's it. And then I can just snip that off. Please make sure you don't snip the wrong thing. It's so disheartening when you do that, and I have done it myself in the past. You know, you pop your snips in, you're not really thinking, and suddenly you look down and you've gone through the wrong bit of wire. And there's nothing you can do about it. Let's just get that in and smooth. Flatten it down. Okay, now let's do the same with the other side. Oh, I've still got this little fine bit. So if I wrap that around the piece that I'm about to finish off now 2 or 3 times. Yeah. And then trim it. Smooth it down. I can then pass this through there, and it sort of finishes off both pieces in one go. Snips. Trim that off. Press it down. Lovely. Oh, I still got that bit of silver left, haven't I? To put my beads away. With these 2mm beads, if I don't put them away straight away, that's it. They're off and they're all over the place, and basically you've lost them. So let me just finish off with this wire. Where did I go through? Through there. Trim it down. And press that end down. There. No sharp bits. Now let's have a look. Nothing like the picture, but then again they never are. But I really like it. It's really nice. It's very Celtic. It's straighten that up a bit. Look great on a leather thong. I also look great as a pin with the pin through it. So I'm going to oxidise it. Of course I'm going to oxidise it. So there we go. The finished arch pendant. Thank you very much for watching. It was kind of a long one today, wasn't it, with that? And happy wrapping. Can't wait to see what you make.